The wind came howling over the ridge before dawn, a bone-deep roar that rattled the bones of the tents and drove snow in high, stinging sheets across the frozen plain. The research team had pressed onward despite the warnings. Satellite feeds had predicted only a light flurry, and they trusted their equipment more than the capricious whims of the Arctic, that vast white wasteland where maps blurred into ice and every landmark vanished beneath a shifting blanket of snow. By the time the flare of their last GPS beacon sputtered out, the sun had hidden entirely behind a curtain of ice-laden clouds, and the world around them had collapsed into a uniform, disorienting white. They huddled together, numb with cold and fear, the edges of their vision already melting into the storm's furious swirl. From the swirling chaos emerged Aurora, the expedition's only hope and its smallest member, a young Arctic fox whose coat, blending seamlessly with the snow, appeared almost spectral in the whiteout. She padded through the deep drifts with uncanny grace, each compact paw sliding across the surface with absolute confidence. The scientists had never seen anything like it. Her black eyes glowed with a strange intelligence, two obsidian beacons scanning for hidden crevasses and patches of wind-blown ice. With a single, sharp yip, she alerted them to the hollow boom that betrayed the presence of a ridge set back from the camp, a bank of ice not visible to the naked eye but perilous to those who walked blindly. One of the researchers, his face streaked with frost, followed where Aurora led, stumbling across a thin crust that might have given way under their combined weight. Had he continued on the wrong bearing, he would have plunged into the bone-chilling crevasse below. As they gathered at Aurora's side, the storm intensified, snowflakes exploding against their gear like shards of glass. Aurora pressed her nose to the wind, nostrils flaring at the faint scent of the sea, salt and brine carried on an updraft from the distant inlet, and angled her body toward that invisible beacon. Her white tail swept behind her in a slow, deliberate arc, slicing through the dusk-gray veil, and the team rallied around that single, living guide. Each step forward was a battle against exhaustion and the numbing cold that sought to steal their breath. Yet Aurora moved on, tireless, hopping lightly from drift to drift as if born of the storm itself. Hours passed. The researchers slipped and reeled, but Aurora remained ahead, her form the only constant in the shifting landscape. When the wind briefly lulled, she paused and lifted one ear, listening for the faint echo of their camp's diesel generator, a heartbeat of warmth and shelter lost somewhere in the flat white sea. She gave a soft, encouraging yip, an invitation to follow. As the world's edges reformed around them, dark shapes of buried rocks and wind-sculpted snow dunes materialized. Beyond them, through a final curtain of drifting ice, Aurora's keen eyes caught the glimmer of canvas and frost-coated equipment poles. She bounded forward, triumphant, and turned, her gaze fixed on the exhausted figures trailing behind. With that single, triumphant turn, the team realized that in this land of frozen silence, life's boldest guides often come on four swift paws, and that so long as Aurora led, no one would be lost to the whiteout forever. Aurora slipped away from the safety of the tent's entrance and melted into the storm's white roar, her slender body lost almost instantly beneath the swirling drifts. Behind her, the researchers huddled, their voices muffled against scarves and snow-crusted parkas, but Aurora did not wait for calls or commands, she trusted her instincts more than any human beacon. With each graceful bound, she skimmed across the wind-polished ice, paws silent on a surface so smooth it seemed to glow beneath the snow. Her nose, a dark pinpoint in the blur of white, quivered as she sampled the frigid air, catching traces of distant ocean spray and the faint, musky scent of wind-carved rock. For hours she led them across an endless expanse of flat ice, where the horizon vanished into the same ghostly gray that cloaked the sky. Even experienced polar travelers could not keep their bearings here, every direction looked identical, and compasses spun erratically under the northern lights. Yet Aurora moved with unerring purpose, ears pricked forward, tail streaming behind like a banner of confidence. When the team stumbled or faltered, she paused, turning in place to chitter softly, as though urging them on with a promise that the next step would bring them closer to safety. Beneath the snow's deceptive blanket lay hidden dangers, thin patches of sea ice, black as obsidian cracks against the white, and pressure ridges where the ice had buckled into lethal spikes. Aurora detected them a heartbeat before danger, she would pivot, nose to the ground, and lead the group in a wide arc, skirting the threat. When a scientist, his goggles rimmed with frost, lost his footing and slid toward a yawning fissure, Aurora darted ahead, pressing a soft muzzle against his boot until he stopped, heart pounding, and watched as she guided him back to solid ground. Her silent step spoke volumes. "Follow me, trust the path I carve." At one point, the wind died away so completely that the world fell into an eerie stillness. The researchers looked around, startled, as if awakened from a trance. Aurora raised her head and howled into the quiet, a sharp, clear note that shattered the calm. Beyond them, a jagged ridge of ice loomed into view, lit by the faint glow of an upturned sky. It was the very landmark they had hoped to find before the storm closed in, a natural windbreak where they could pitch their tents and warm themselves. Aurora trotted toward it, the first fox-shaped silhouette they had glimpsed since the whiteout swallowed the camp. Reaching the ridge, she paused at its base and looked back, eyes bright with expectancy. The researchers, weary and frozen, stumbled the last few yards and collapsed against the sheltering wall of ice blocks. As they set about digging out a shelter, lantern flames sputtering in the dusk light, Aurora settled on a ledge above them, her white coat blending into the snowdrifts. She turned in a slow circle, surveying the vast plain she had traversed, then curled her tail around her paws. In the hush that followed the storm's brief ceasefire, her gentle presence was a living testament to the power of instinct and resilience, proof that even in the world's harshest silence, a single, determined guide could speak the loudest language of all, the path home. Aurora hesitated at the edge of the chasm, snow swirling around her ankles and whipping her fur into a wild halo of white. Below lay a yawning crevasse, its walls of blue-black ice carved by centuries of shifting glaciers, a jagged canyon that plunged into darkness. The research team huddled behind her, voices muffled by wind and layers of cold-weather gear, each breath pluming in the frigid air like ghostly signals of despair. Their footsteps had come to an abrupt halt at this fractured barrier, their compasses spun uselessly in the magnetic turbulence, and the storm's fury showed no sign of relenting. Yet Aurora stood firm, ears pricked forward, whiskers quivering as she tested the air currents for eddies that whispered of hidden cornices and wind-packed snow bridges. With a graceful bound, she slipped forward onto a narrow ledge of packed snow that jutted from one side of the crevasse. Her paws, cushioned by dense fur, found purchase on the ice's razor-sharp facets. She crouched low, eyes scanning every crack and cavity, then bolted across the gap in a single, fluid motion, landfall on the opposite rim so precise it seemed guided by instinct alone. Behind her, a researcher's heart thundered as he watched that lithe silhouette clear the void. When Aurora paused and turned to chitter softly, it was both invitation and command. "Trust this path," she seemed to say, "and the chasm shall not claim you." One by one, the scientists followed. The first stepped gingerly onto the shelf Aurora had tested, boots sliding on secret pockets of ice but corrected by a quick hoof tap of the fox. Each crossing was a battle, wind clawed at their hoods, snow crunched and crumbled beneath uncertain weight, and the chasm's echoes whispered of a fatal misstep. But with every encouraging glance from Aurora, her dark eyes alight with calm determination, they pressed onward. A slip here would have meant plummeting into an abyss where no rescue could reach, yet the path held firm, snow bridges flexing beneath them like yielding membranes before springing back with unwavering support. Midway across, the storm's roar swelled, and visibility collapsed to a pale gloom. Aurora pressed onward, her white form barely visible against the swirling flakes, yet her presence cut through the blizzard like a living beacon. She navigated past unstable overhangs where ice threatened to calve off, paused at every hollow clink that signaled a hidden void, and led the expedition through a network of fissures until, at last, they reached a plateau of solid ice. There, Aurora bounded up a gentle ramp of packed snow that led to a narrow ridge overlooking the frozen valley beyond. The researchers stood breathless, frost-crusted and wide-eyed, as they realized they stood upon the only safe crossing the chasm had to offer, and that without Aurora's fearless venture, they would still be lost in the storm's whiteout. In that silent moment, as the wind carried the echo of Aurora's last soft bark across the icy hollows, the team felt a surge of hope. They gathered around her, hands resting gratefully on her dense winter coat, and pressed forward down the newly forged path, every step a testament to the Arctic fox whose courage had bridged the impossible and guided them back toward survival. Aurora pressed on as the wind deepened into a keening howl, driving needles of ice through every layer of the researchers' clothing and stealing the warmth from their bones. The sky had turned from gunmetal gray to an inky blur, and dusk collapsed into night almost before their eyes. Each gasp of breath felt like inhaling shards of glass, yet they dared not slow their pace, not when the Arctic night could swallow them whole in its silent, frozen arms. Ahead, the pale arc of the moon briefly broke through the roiling clouds, illuminating the path Aurora had scouted with just enough silver light to guide her sure-footed leaps. She moved as if woven from the storm itself, body low to the ground, tail sweeping behind to brush away drifted snow, ears twitching at the slightest snap of ice or distant groan of shifting glacier. The researchers stumbled at her side, boots sloshing through snow so deep it clung to their gaiters in heavy clumps. One of them, Dr. Richards, gasped and clutched at Aurora's tail, a silent plea to not abandon him, when frostbite seized his fingers so fiercely he feared never again to feel his own skin. Aurora halted and turned, letting out a sharp yip that cut through the gale. As if summoned by her cry, a ridge of wind-swept rocks emerged from the white haze, and she led them into its lee, a narrow pocket of fragile shelter where the storm's teeth were dulled if not entirely blunted. There she pressed her body against Dr. Richards' leg, radiating the little warmth an Arctic fox could muster, and the doctor pressed his frost-numbed hand against her fur as though drawing life from her very heart. When the momentary lull ended and the storm's fury returned, they set off once more, staggering across a plateau where the snow lay deceptively smooth and hollowed chambers of trapped wind made every step a challenge. Aurora paused at each marker she had crafted in her mind, a lone black stone, a twist in the ice ridge, a curve of an old driftwood skeleton, and guided them in precise detours around hidden sastrugi that could have toppled a man into yawning crevasses. The air grew colder still, their lungs burned, their cheeks stung with frost, and shadows of doubt flickered in every flake-swung gust. Yet Aurora's presence never wavered. With each determined bound she erased a track of safety behind her, forging outward into the unknown and carrying them beyond the place where compasses spun and maps lay useless. By the time they glimpsed the warm, inviting glow of their original camp's kerosene lamp through a thin veil of blowing snow, the night had become a living force, pressing in from every side. The researchers, hollowed by cold and adrenaline, fell to their knees in silent reverence as Aurora led them over the final drift. She stopped at the tent's flap, the wind tugging at her ears, and let out a soft, triumphant chitter that was both farewell and a promise kept. Inside, the explorers wrapped her in a spare blanket warmed by body heat, offering her the ration of dried fish they had saved for emergencies. As Aurora curled into a grateful ball, the team exhaled in unison, their trembling hands finally still, knowing that without her fearless will to brave the storm's black heart, they would never have found their way home in the Arctic's brutal embrace. Aurora moved ahead with the expedition doggedly at her heels, their labored breath steaming in the frigid air. Just when the wind seemed intent on erasing every sign of passage, she paused at the mouth of a narrow ice canyon. Within its walls rose clusters of perfectly formed crystals, diamond-bright stalagmites and stalactites that glowed with the harvest moon's pale light. Each crystal facet caught and refracted the silver beams, splintering them into prismatic winks that danced across the canyon floor like living lanterns. Aurora's ears twitched as she sniffed the air. These moonlit beacons were nature's guideposts in a world where compasses spun uselessly. She sprang forward to the nearest crystal cluster, her paws crunching on the packed snow between shining spines of ice, and brushed her side against the largest pillar. The entire formation shivered, sending ripples of light racing up the frozen column. At that signal, the researchers understood, follow the trail of sparkling arcs. They pressed on in single file, each scientist's headlamp off to preserve night vision, their eyes drawn to the columns that lined the hidden corridor. Between the luminous walls, the storm's howl softened as though held in check by the canyon's glittering embrace. With every step, they passed another crystal, each tuned to the moon's angle and marking a safe footing above unseen crevasses. The formations varied, some clustered low like frozen flowers, others soared 20 feet high like icy sentries, yet every one reflected that same guiding light. Halfway through the canyon, a sudden gust rattled the crystals, producing a haunting chime of ice on ice that sent shivers through the team. Aurora paused on a low ridge of frozen shards and looked back, tail flicking in encouragement. When the researchers reached her side, the tallest among them, Dr. Klein, knelt to trace a finger along the path of greatest reflection, as if reading Braille. "The ice has mapped our route," he whispered hoarsely, voice echoing between the glimmering walls. Each luminous sparkle became a waypoint, marking a flawless path through the labyrinth. As they emerged from the canyon's mouth, exhausted but unscathed, Aurora led them through one final grove of moonlit crystals glistening like a silent salute. The air here was calmer, the wind stilled by the canyon's shelter, and beyond the ice gate lay the open plain leading to their camp. Before disappearing into the swirling white, Aurora paused, her coat bathed in crystal light, and turned in a slow circle, as though sealing the passage behind them. The researchers huddled close, hearts pounding with gratitude, and one by one they pressed their hands to the nearest crystal, committing its shimmer to memory so they could follow her path again. In that moment, beneath the ghostly glow of moon and ice, they understood that the Arctic's harshest trials could be met with its own silent guides, stenographic crystals and an Arctic fox whose instinct was as clear and unwavering as the light they followed. The storm's fury reached its peak just beyond the Crystal Canyon's exit, transforming the plain into a churning sea of snow and ice. The researchers, already spent from their passage through wind-lashed heights and moonlit caverns, felt the gale battering their bodies, each breath a pitiless stab of frost. Packs dragged at their shoulders like anchored weights, boots sank into drifts that rose above their knees, and ahead, the faint shape of their camp was swallowed in the blizzard's white maw. Their morale frayed, whispered fears trembled on frozen lips. Had Aurora's guidance brought them only to perish in an even deadlier storm? Aurora, pressed low against the ground, lifted her snout toward the roaring wind and let loose a piercing cry. It cut through the gale like a blade, a single, clear note that carried farther than any human shout. The sound tumbled across the drifts, carving an acoustic path where the wind's howl had drowned all other hope. For the scientists, that cry was more than a signal, it was a promise unspoken yet impossible to doubt. They turned toward the fox's silhouette, just visible through the swirling white, and felt their hearts lift even as numbing cold threatened to collapse their limbs. Encouraged by Aurora's call, they pressed on, aligning themselves behind her as an unbreakable escort. She trotted with elegant surety, each bound forging a corridor of wind-shadowed snow in her wake. The team followed in single file, boots kicking firm patches of ice that solidified in her footprints. When exhaustion threatened to overwhelm them, a misstep here meaning a face plant into the frozen crust, Aurora would pause and call again, the note rising above the tumult like a clarion urging onward. Each cry was a lifeline, a reminder that they were not lost or abandoned but led by a creature whose instinct outshone every instrument they had carried. At one point, the wind clawed at their flanks so violently that the smallest researcher, Dr. Nguyen, nearly toppled into a drift. Aurora bounded back to his side in an instant, brushing her body against his leg and chittering sharply. He braced himself, found fresh resolve in her heat-furred frame, and followed as she led him around a hidden ridge that the gale had carved into an impassable barrier. Beyond it lay a shallow gully that funneled the wind overhead, shielding them just enough for them to catch their breath, and the scientists pressed together in that fragile lee, hands clasped against the storm's teeth. As the gale continued its merciless attack, Aurora's calls became the expedition's heartbeat. Each echo washed through the snowfields, searching for fractured spirits and broken will. And with every response, a pause in the wind's shriek, a faint shelter in the next drift, they found a reason to carry on. Time blurred, minutes stretching into hours under that howling roof of ice and wind, but Aurora never faltered. Her patience was infinite, her determination, a blazing thread stitched through the storm's white tapestry. Finally, the faint glow of lantern light appeared ahead, winking like a distant star against the gray curtain. It was the camp, half-buried tents and flickering firelight now visible through the thinning hiss of snowfall. Aurora's triumphant cry rang out once more, long and exultant, and the researchers staggered forward through the last drifts, arms outstretched toward the warmth that promised survival. As they collapsed by the fire's glow, cheeks stinging with renewed blood, they turned to find Aurora stepping into the lantern light, her silver coat etched with ice crystals. In that moment, the expedition understood that her cry had been more than a signal, it was the echo of hope that shattered despair, guiding them home when all else had failed. The wind finally began to ease as the first pale fingers of dawn crept over the horizon, turning the endless white curtain into a soft wash of pink and gold. Aurora stood at the lip of the final snowfield, her fur crusted with ice but her eyes bright with resolve. Behind her, the researchers, faces streaked with frost and relief, gathered themselves for the last stretch of their ordeal. Each breath they drew now felt warmer, carried on the promise of sunlight rather than the razor edge of the gale. Aurora's body tensed for a moment, then she darted forward, low and swift, leaving a ribbon of paw prints that flashed silver in the dawn light. The team, heartened by her confidence, followed as best they could, stumbling over drifts that now lay firm and gleaming under the newborn sun. With each bound, Aurora's chest heaved in a steady rhythm, and though her paws ached from hours on the hard ice, she pressed on, guiding the humans toward a distant glow, the camp's small cluster of tents, still half buried in snow, but alive with light and the crackle of a rekindled fire. The sight brought fresh strength to the researchers' tired limbs. Dr. Richards let out a hoarse laugh that turned to a cough as he pressed ahead, parka's sleeves soaked with sweat and melting snow. Behind him, Dr. Nguyen and Dr. Klein exchanged a look of astonishment. Only Aurora's unerring instincts could have led them through the worst storm any of them had ever seen, to emerge at this very point where warmth waited. As they drew within a few dozen yards, the camp's guardian dogs, fierce huskies at the best of times, rushed forward in joyous howls, racing circles around Aurora before recognizing their human companions and shifting their jubilation into excited barks of greeting. Flames leapt higher in the metal fire drum, painting the snow in amber splashes that pushed back the morning's remaining chill. Aurora paused at the edge of the light, nostrils flaring to catch the comforting scent of coffee brewing in a battered kettle and stew simmering over coals. She loped forward into the circle of warmth, shedding flakes of ice from her back, and the researchers knelt to cradle her, pressing her muzzle into their gloved hands as tears of gratitude thawed on their cheeks. Nobody spoke for a long moment. The soft crackle of the fire and the hushed sigh of melting snow were all that filled the air. Then Dr. Amara rose and placed a gentle hand on Aurora's head, voice trembling as she addressed the fox who had become both their guide and their salvation. As dawn's full light spilled across the camp, the researchers gathered close, sharing blankets and hot cups, and in that shared glow of warmth and survival, Aurora slipped quietly to the edge of the circle. She curled up on a bale of furs left for her, eyelids heavy but spirit undimmed, her journey complete. Around her, the camp came fully back to life, voices rose in laughter and relief, gear was stowed and dried, and plans were made for the day's work. Yet for all the tasks ahead, everyone knew this moment, this sunrise moment, belonged to Aurora, the Arctic fox whose daring journey through storm and snow had carried them home.